Have you ever looked at a huge 1960s coupe and felt like something just didn't add up? It wasn't sporty, it wasn't a muscle car, it wasn't cheap, and yet, nobody seemed to want it. When we think about the 1960s, collective memory always goes to the same place. Muscle cars, aggressive hardtops, flashy convertibles, cars designed to be desired. But running parallel to all of that, American brands were also building large, elegant, very expensive coupes that today feel like they never even existed. Cars trapped between segments, too big to be sports cars, too discreet to be status symbols, too expensive for the wrong audience. Many of them sold poorly, others disappeared quickly, and some were simply ignored from day one. In this video, we're going to uncover some of the rarest large coupes of the 1960s, cars that today feel like ghosts, even to seasoned collectors. And we're starting with one that perfectly represents this story. A coupe that wasn't rejected for being bad, but for not knowing exactly what it wanted to be. 1964. Dodge Custom 880. Some cars are rare because they were exclusive, and some cars are rare because they were weird from the very beginning. The Custom 880 is exactly that. A full-size coupe that looks like a Dodge, but also looks like a budget Chrysler, and sometimes even feels like a car put together at the last minute. And the most interesting part is that, in many ways, it actually was. This model was born from a rushed decision by Dodge to fill a gap in its lineup, and that improvised origin shows in its personality. It has presence, it has size, it has power. But it also has that strange aura of a car that never quite found its place. On the road, the 880 was a big animal. One of those cars that filled an entire lane without asking permission. Long hood, high belt line, restrained chrome, and a silhouette that many didn't consider the prettiest of its era, but definitely one of the most imposing. And that's where the magic is for this video. It's not the kind of big coupe people remember, because in the 1960s, Dodge stole attention with more emotional names, more sporty, more aspirational. The 880, on the other hand, was a car for practical people with money. Someone who wanted a massive coupe for traveling, comfortable, powerful, and with that, I don't care what's fashionable attitude. Under the hood, there was nothing timid. It could be equipped with large Chrysler V8s, engines designed to move tons of steel with almost insulting ease. It wasn't a pure muscle car, but it had that same feeling of continuous thrust, torque that shows up effortlessly, as if the car is always half a second away from reminding you that it weighs a lot and doesn't care. And that was the dangerous thing about these huge coupes. Speed arrived wrapped in calm, with smooth steering, a commanding driving position, and isolation that made you feel like you were going slow, even when the speedometer was telling a very different story. So, why is it so rare today? Because this type of in-between coupe was the first to disappear over time. It wasn't the most desirable to collectors, it wasn't famous in movies, it wasn't the one people put on posters. Many were driven into the ground, modified, abandoned, or sent straight to the junkyard when they fell out of fashion. And because its story got lost between more famous Dodge and Chrysler lines, nobody bothered to preserve them the way they did with a Charger or a GTX. That's why today, seeing a Custom 880 coupe in good condition is almost like seeing a ghost. It exists, but it shows up very rarely. And the best part is that this is just the beginning, because the next car on the list is rare for a completely different reason. 1966. Mercury Park Lane. If the Custom 880 was rare because it was born half-finished, the Park Lane Coupe is rare for something much more subtle. Nobody really knew what it was supposed to be, and that was its biggest problem. In the 1960s, Mercury lived in an awkward position, too elegant to be a Ford, but without the symbolic weight of a Lincoln. The Park Lane was born right in that gray area, trying to offer luxury without excess and size without ostentation. But the market never fully understood it. What's curious is that on paper, this car was exactly what many buyers claimed they wanted. A large, refined, quiet coupe with clean lines and a very serious presence. It didn't have the aggression of a muscle car or the theatrical flair of a big Cadillac. It was a highway car built for long trips, for driving one-handed with the radio on. And precisely because of that, it went unnoticed in a decade increasingly obsessed with image and excitement. Visually, the Park Lane didn't shout. It didn't try to grab attention at stoplights or impose respect through exaggeration. Its design was balanced, almost diplomatic, with elegant proportions and an air of quiet luxury that today feels extremely appealing, but at the time was seen as boring. Many buyers preferred to jump straight to a Lincoln or stick with a better-equipped Ford. The Park Lane sat in the middle, without a clear identity for the general public. And yet, beneath that calm exterior, there was plenty of muscle. These coupes could be equipped with large FE family VI8s, engines designed to push massive bodies with deceptively smooth power. The reason for its rarity today is almost inevitable. The Park Lane Coupe had limited production and a short commercial life. It was never a big seller, and without an iconic image, almost no one bothered to preserve them as they aged. Many were forgotten, parted out, or simply used until they vanished. Today, even among Mercury collectors, it's a model that surprises people when it appears, because most don't even remember that it existed as a coupe. And what makes this even more interesting is that the next car takes this story in a completely different direction. 1963, Oldsmobile Starfire. At this point in the video, the Starfire completely changes the atmosphere. If the previous models were rare because of confusion or lack of identity, the Starfire was rare for a much more uncomfortable reason. It was too sophisticated for its own good. Oldsmobile created this car to show just how far the brand could go in terms of luxury, technology, and refinement. But the result was a coupe that didn't clearly fit anywhere in the market. It wasn't a popular car, and it never tried to be. It was expensive, exclusive, and clearly aimed at a buyer who wanted something more refined than a Pontiac, but without fully stepping up to Cadillac. The problem was that this buyer barely existed. In the 1960s, if someone wanted real luxury, they went straight to Cadillac. And if they wanted character or sportiness, they looked elsewhere. The Starfire ended up trapped in no man's land. Visually, it was an elegant and very well-proportioned car, with a clean and sophisticated design that today feels extremely attractive. It had no exaggerations or visual tricks. It was the kind of coupe that conveyed class effortlessly, with subtle details and a presence that aged better than it sold when new. Ironically, that restrained approach was one of the reasons it went unnoticed in its own time. Where it truly stood out was beneath the surface. The Starfire was loaded with advanced technology for the early 1960s. A refined suspension, high-end interiors, and under the hood, large V8 engines designed to deliver smooth, powerful, and quiet performance. It wasn't aggressive, but it was one of the most refined full-size coupes you could buy in the United States at the time. The result of all this was surprisingly low production. The Starfire coupe never sold in large numbers, and because it was expensive and complex, many were eventually abandoned or dismantled over the years. Today, the market is starting to rediscover it. A well-preserved 1963 Oldsmobile Starfire coupe typically trades between $25,000 and $40,000, figures that reflect both its rarity and its level of luxury and quality. It isn't cheap, but it's still far below what it offers in historical and technical terms. And now, I want to know what you think. Do you believe the Oldsmobile Starfire was a car ahead of its time that the market failed to understand? Or simply a model that was too expensive and too discreet to succeed in the 1960s? Leave it in the comments because the next car on the list shifts the focus once again, bringing us back to a more grounded kind of luxury, just as forgotten. 1967, Buick Wildcat. This is one of those names many people remember, but almost always incompletely. When Buick in the 1960s comes up, the conversation usually revolves around the LeSabre or the Electra, while the Wildcat gets pushed into a hard-to-define middle ground. And in its full-size coupe form, that confusion was even greater. The Wildcat coupe was born at a time when Buick was trying to attract a younger audience without completely breaking away from its traditional image. The result was a large, powerful, elegant car with an ambiguous identity. It wasn't a pure sports coupe, but it also wasn't a classic luxury sedan. That lack of definition is exactly what made it interesting, and what ultimately condemned it to being forgotten. From a design standpoint, it has a very strong presence. It's long, low, and wide, with a silhouette that suggests motion even when standing still. The lines are more fluid than on other Buicks of the era, with a slightly more aggressive feel, but without going over the top. Today it looks like a perfect representation of the final years of the American full-size golden era. Mechanically, Buick didn't hold back. The Wildcat Coupe could be equipped with massive V8 engines, such as the 430 cubic inch unit, producing close to 360 horsepower. It wasn't a light car, but the abundant torque allowed it to move with impressive ease. It was quiet, refined power, very much in line with Buick's philosophy. When it comes to production, this is where the real rarity factor appears. While the Wildcat itself wasn't an ultra-exclusive model, the coupe version represented a much smaller share compared to sedans and more popular hardtops in the lineup. On top of that, many were heavily used and never considered special cars. Over time, that drastically reduced the number of well-preserved survivors. Today on the current market, well-kept examples typically sell between $20,000 and $35,000. A reasonable figure for a large coupe with one of the most impressive V8s of its era. 1968 AMC Ambassador. When people talk about large American coupes of the 1960s, AMC almost never enters the conversation. And that's exactly what makes the Ambassador so special. In a decade dominated by Detroit's giants, AMC dared to play in a territory that, honestly, wasn't theirs. And the result was one of the rarest full-size coupes of the era. The Ambassador was the biggest, most expensive, and most ambitious model AMC could offer. It wasn't designed to compete in volume, but to prove that the brand could also deliver luxury, size, and presence. The problem was that buyers never really associated AMC with that kind of car. For many, a large coupe was supposed to wear a Chrysler, Ford, or GM badge. AMC simply wasn't on their radar. Visually, the Ambassador Coupe is a very interesting car. It's long, elegant, and surprisingly clean in its lines, with a design that emphasizes solidity rather than aggression. It doesn't try to be sporty or extravagant. It's a serious, almost formal coupe, built for long trips and relaxed driving. Today, that restraint makes it stand out even more, because it looks unlike anything AMC built before or after. Under the hood, the Ambassador had no insecurities. It could be equipped with large V8 engines, including the 343 and the 390 cubic inch units, the latter producing over 300 horsepower. These were robust engines with plenty of torque, capable of moving a large, heavy car with ease. It wasn't a muscle car, but it was a coupe with a very serious power reserve for its intended role. The true rarity shows up when you look at the numbers. Overall, Ambassador production was already low compared to its direct rivals, and within that total, hardtop coupe versions accounted for only a small fraction. Many were sold to a very specific audience, and most disappeared over time. Today, seeing one in good condition is uncommon even in the United States. On today's market, the 1968 AMC Ambassador Coupe remains a deeply underrated gem. The few well-preserved examples usually sell between $15,000 and $25,000. Surprisingly low figures for a large, V8-powered, and extremely rare coupe. And now, I want to hear your opinion. Do you think AMC was too bold in trying to compete in the luxury full-size coupe segment? Or do you believe the Ambassador was doomed from day one because of the brand's image? Leave it in the comments, because the next car on the list takes us to a much more famous name, but in a version that very few people remember. 1966. Lincoln Continental Coupe. Talking about the Continental means talking about power, presence, and a very specific idea of American luxury. But almost every time this model comes up, the image that appears is the sedan with suicide doors. Solemn, presidential, and absolutely iconic. What many people forget is that the Continental also existed as a coupe, and in that form, it became one of the rarest and least recognized versions of the entire lineup. The Continental was not born to be discreet, but it was never meant to grab attention instantly either. It was a large, low, elegant car, with proportions very different from other coupes of its era. Its design was clean, almost architectural, with no exaggerated fins or unnecessary ornamentation. Everything about it conveyed quiet authority, as if it had nothing to prove. In the 1960s, this Lincoln was aimed at a very specific audience: executives, public figures, people who valued silent status over spectacle. The problem was that this same audience usually leaned toward the sedan, which was more practical and more closely associated with institutional power. The coupe ended up stuck in no man's land, too formal for buyers looking for sportiness, and too impractical for those who wanted a traditional Continental. Under the hood, however, there was no doubt about its character. The Continental Coupe was fitted with massive V8 engines, such as the 462 cubic inch unit, producing around 340 horsepower. It wasn't a fast car in the sporting sense, but it was extraordinarily solid and authoritative. The rarity of the Continental Coupe is directly tied to its production. Lincoln built far fewer coupes than sedans, and a large portion of them were used intensively for years, with no intention of preservation. Today, finding one in good condition is far more difficult than its name might suggest. On the current market, well-preserved examples typically range between $25,000 and $40,000, depending on condition and originality. 1964 Imperial Crown Coupe. If there was one car in the 1960s that pushed the concept of luxury, size, and exclusivity to an almost irrational level, it was the Imperial Crown. This wasn't just another model in Chrysler's catalog. Imperial functioned almost as a standalone brand, created to compete directly with Cadillac and Lincoln at the very top of the market, with no compromises. Unlike other large coupes of the era, the Imperial didn't try to look sporty or modern. Its design was majestic, almost intimidating, long, wide, low, and with a presence that filled any street without relying on visual excess. It was aimed at a very small audience. High-level executives, major business leaders, public figures who wanted the absolute maximum in comfort and prestige. And that was reflected in everything, from the interior materials to the acoustic insulation, to a build quality that was clearly above the American industry average of the time. Under that massive hood sat one of the most serious engines of its era. The Crown was powered by the 413 cubic inch V8, a gigantic block producing around 340 horsepower, paired with an almost absurd amount of torque. It wasn't designed to race, but to move with overwhelming authority. The real reason this car works so well as the closing chapter of this video is its rarity. The Imperial was never a high-volume model, and coupe versions represented an even smaller fraction of already limited production numbers. On today's market, the 1964 Imperial Crown Coupe is a true quiet collector's piece. Well-preserved examples typically sell between $30,000 and $50,000, though their real value isn't just in the price, but in how difficult they are to find in good condition. And with that, we reach the end of this journey through some of the rarest large coupes of the 1960s. Cars that weren't born to be posters or attention grabbers, but to exist on the margins of an era dominated by other stars. Large, formal, and quiet machines that, precisely because of that, eventually faded from collective memory. Now, I want to hear your opinion. Of all the coupes we saw today, which one surprised you the most? Which do you think is the most unfairly forgotten and deserves far more recognition? Leave it in the comments, because many of the best conversations on this channel start right there. And if you want to explore the other side of this story, you need to watch the video where we talk about the fastest luxury coupes of the 1960s. Elegant, refined, and seemingly calm cars that hid massive engines and performance capable of humiliating many muscle cars. True luxury sleepers that prove that, in that era, speed didn't always need to shout. Click on the video on screen and join us on that journey through the most unexpected side of American luxury. See you there.